In the e-commerce direct-to-consumer space, there's three key operating levers that you have to be able to provide yourself with an advantage over competition and scale efficiently. And in this video, I want to run through these three operating levers. I would not start an e-commerce business today unless I had a significant advantage in one of these three buckets. When we take on clients, we look at these three individual buckets and we assess whether they have a significant advantage within the D2C e-commerce space. If they don't, quite often, we don't work with them. And this is an example of that. This is a real P&L of a prospective client. So a prospect that came to us, we did an audit, we pulled together a normalized P&L for them. We didn't decide to move forward and take them on because of the structure of their P&L and because of a lack of advantage within the three core pillars. So what are the three core pillars? Well, I'm stealing this from Common Thread Collective because this is the way that they conceptualize a P&L. And I think it's a perfect encapsulation of how to look at a P&L in quite a simplistic way. And so if you were to simplify the P&L down into four core items, you have cost of delivery, which is cost of goods sold plus shipping and fulfillment, and anything else related with the purchasing, so the manufacturing of the product, and the actual delivery to the end consumer. The next is marketing. So how much percentage of revenue are you allocating towards marketing? The next is operating expenses. So that's really everything else within the P&L. And then you have profit. And profit is a function of 1 minus all of these other percentages. And so a typical average P&L, and Common Thread Collective refers to this as the 4-quarter P&L, is a quarter of your revenue goes to cost of delivery, a quarter goes to marketing, a quarter goes to OPEX, and then you're left with a quarter in profit. Now, realistically, I've almost never seen this to be the case in any direct-to-consumer e-commerce P&L, but it's a nice theory and a way to encapsulate how a P&L flows through. From here, these are really your three core levers. And so a good example is Ridge Wallet. Ridge Wallet's P&L looks something like this. And so they have really good gross margins. And so their cost of delivery is tiny. And they're also relatively lean. And so what that ends up allowing is an ability to really crank up spend on direct marketing. And so because if they operated at a full mode, they'd have 46% profit. The reality is that the market will always push net profit to a specific range unless you provide unbelievable value, which will eventually get commoditized and the opportunity will be taken by other people in the market. Like, that's always how these things work. And so anytime you see really high profit margins, it's because of a short period of time of arbitrage where someone's taken advantage of an exploit within the free market, and then someone else will eventually come in, cut prices, and will standardize net profit down. I find that a really easy way to encapsulate that businesses, even though you might look at the metrics and you might go, wow, cost of delivery is so small here, OPEX is so small, they could run at 50% net. You never do, because a competitor will just come in and crank up marketing and destroy you down to 20% margins unless you crank marketing as well. So in this case, they in fact do that. They operate at about like 55% marketing allocation. And so these are really the three core levers, which is number one, do you have really incredible gross margins that really allows the flow through to gross margin to be really strong? Or number two, do you have an ability to generate really low CAC? Can you allocate 5% towards marketing and still have extreme demand at the top of the P&L? Or number three, can you operate incredibly lean? Can you operate at 20, 30, $40 million in revenue with a 5-person team? And so they're really the three core advantages that you need to have. You need to have one of them. Ideally, you have multiple, but that's very rare. And to just write this out, number one is incredibly high margins, gross. Number two is incredibly low CAC. And then number three is incredibly lean team. If you have all of these, you're in an incredibly good position, but normally it's very difficult to even get one of these. So this brand that we took on, this was their P&L structure. They had 70% cost of delivery. They were allocating 16% to marketing, and their OPEX was 30%. And so they were negative profit. They're sitting at negative 16%. And you can actually see this in the P&L over time, where they're negative almost every single month historically, with one profitable month. Why is that? The reason why that's the case is because they sell their own product and they have no strong distribution channel. And so when you sell your own product, so you're not an online retailer, and you distribute and you don't have a strong distribution channel, you need allocation towards marketing to be able to be high. If you don't have a way to acquire customers very, very cheap and you need to use paid ads or acquisition as a strategy here, you need to have percentage points available within the P&L to actually be able to spend on ads. They don't have any percentage points available because their cost of delivery is so high, and they're also so high on operating expenses as a proportion of revenue. Now, to be honest, their operating expenses are actually super lean. They only have about 8K in OPEX, but it's because their revenue figures are so low on top line that it causes this percentage to blow out. And so they're really in this catch-22, or is the chicken or the egg first here? Because the issue is they need to substantially improve top-line revenue so that OPEX democratizes down to 12%. And I've visualized this here. If their revenue goes from 25K to 67, OPEX goes down to 12%. Good position to be in. However, it still doesn't fix the problem that they can't really allocate anything to marketing. The marketing percentage here still has to remain incredibly thin, and they're only at 0% profit. And so fundamentally, this business has no advantage and no ability to really work in the direct-to-consumer e-commerce space. If you have no way to fix your margins, and we went through a consulting process with this prospect and gave them a full action plan on how they could fix their margins. And I do think there is some leverage here, and they can probably pull this to 50%. There were some issues with net shipping. There were some issues with product portfolio. There's a lot of small tweaks that they can do, but realistically, they're not getting this lower than 55%. And so what this ends up meaning, and we can put this into the live version over here, 55%, operating expenses is still at 30%, marketing is still at 16%, so they're still negative. And so if these guys really want to get to scale, it means that they need to have some kind of liquid cash investment that's going to allow them to quickly crank up ad spend, which is going to flow into top line demand, which is going to allow OPEX to decrease, which is going to drive them into profit. But even in this position, this isn't a strong business because they don't have any operating leverage across these three core levers. They don't have high margins, and they're never going to get high margins because of the particular product niche that they're in, unless they get significant strength in branding power or they design into a new product. Number two, they don't have a strong distribution channel. They're completely reliant on Google and Facebook ads, and there is no other channel. And to give you an example of what an incredible advantage would be in terms of CAC is having influencer distribution. And so if you have an influencer-backed brand, right, Ridge does this with Marquez, Mr. Beast does this across his brands. There's a bunch of examples of this. I think Jake Paul just launched some kind of supplement into a distribution chain being Walmart. So if you have organic reach that you can leverage, you can drive CAC down to almost nothing, right? Like what is the cost to acquire a customer on a Mr. Beast Feastables bar? It would be near nothing unless you want to calculate his video production into that CAC cost. But I believe he breaks about even on that. So is there even a CAC? In fact, you could probably substantiate that he has a negative CAC here, which is another video in itself. And then number three is incredibly lean team. Now, this only becomes an advantage once you're at scale. And that's why this is the worst of the three in terms of operating a lever to be able to get you to a $4 to $5 million business. Because an incredibly lean team when you're doing 20K revenue a month is not an incredibly lean team. An incredibly lean team in that capacity is no one's on the team. It doesn't make sense. So the lean OPEX only really kicks in once you are at a certain revenue threshold. And so to get to that revenue threshold is really the question. How do you make this a significant advantage? And typically, an incredible operator where you can, and let's put these numbers back to something that's more reasonable. So 60, let's bump this to about 25. So in this instance, this brand, if they could get their cost of delivery down to 60%, they could generate a lever in having a lean team. But it's going to require them having access to capital to scale top line revenue and being an incredible operator to actually be able to execute on that effectively. And it's incredibly high risk. Or they're going to have to do it incredibly slowly over time to where they're operating on very minimal margin. And then they're using their working capital super effectively to continue to scale month on month. Another alternative is they have a really strong repeat purchase rate, which then props up their top line revenue, compounds faster, and dilutes operating expenses. But really, this is the position that most brands are in. Most brands don't have lever number two. They don't have incredibly high margins. Most brands don't have incredibly low CAC due to unique distribution channels that allow for near $0 CAC. It's very rare. And then number three, Most people don't maintain a lean team or are even at a size to where lean team is even a lever within the business. And so the question becomes, how do you even achieve scale as a direct-to-consumer e-commerce brand? You don't have this, and then you don't have the volume here. And it's tough. It's like super difficult. And that's why 90% of businesses fail and do not achieve a 7-figure run rate and then ultimately never even turn a profit. And so to achieve a 7-figure run rate to where you can then get leverage in a lean team, or you might be able to get leverage in some kind of improved distribution channel due to the size and branding that you've built, it takes incredibly acute financial operations and incredibly execution across multiple different channels across the business. You need excellent execution across paid media. You need excellent execution across creative. You need excellent execution across a retention strategy if it makes sense within your particular vertical. You need incredible execution across the actual product and the product experience. And it's 1,000 golden BBs rather than a few silver bullets that actually builds a brand that can have resilience to get to a size in revenue to where they can get operational leverage within a lean operating expense that allows them to continue facilitating growth. It will also allow economies of scale through cost of delivery, which takes a few percentage points off here. And then the one thing we can always guarantee is marketing percentage will always go up. You cannot be reliant on future projecting within a business that marketing as a percentage will go down. It's almost, if there's one guarantee that I can give you through this P&L, it's that this percentage will go up over time. And so you really need to make sure that you're opening up margins as you start to achieve scale by keeping operating expenses low and figuring out how to operate as a lean team, whilst also continuing to maximize margins wherever possible. And maximizing margins in itself is a 60-minute video. Like, there's a lot of different things that you can do here, but you are going to be constrained probably within a 15% movement of your current cost of delivery. So if your cost of delivery is currently 70%, there is no way you're getting it down to 20. There is just no way. The vertical that you're in does not allow it. Now, could you get to 55 through a multitude of changes that's going to take 60 days of execution and is really going to take a competent operator to execute across all of those items? Probably in a best case scenario. But I hope this helped to encapsulate the real 3 core levers that brands have. This is what we always look at when we're doing audits on brands that approach us. Do they have incredible leverage in margins? Do they have incredible leverage in distribution for low CAC? Or, and I'll give you an alternative here, do they have an ability to rapidly iterate on creative faster than any brand within that vertical that's going to allow us to have leverage within Facebook as a distribution channel? Okay, so that is an example here of having incredibly low CAC. And then number 3 is, do they have an incredibly lean team? Or do they have an incredibly lean OpEx? And this really only starts to kick in once you're a $2 to $3 million brand and how well they can cost control operating expenses. And some brands, there's no way to control operating expenses because they own manufacturing or there's other related expenses within the business, which once again is a huge red flag for us and maybe a reason as to why we don't take a brand on, because we're not confident that their P&L position is going to facilitate fast and rapid growth.